This is part one of a series of two webinars. We have our next one next week. And this one is all about seeing beneath the surface. So seeing the system, identifying or diagnosing the real sources of performance drag. And we are going to do some introductions momentarily. So let's get that going. Joining me again to our today's presenters, we have Carol Enriquez, Anna Grome, and Mike Lewis. And if you wouldn't mind going off mic or going off mute, Carol, Anna, and Mike, we will have you introduce yourselves and get us started.
Thanks for tossing it to me, Nancy, for introductions. I have been at Tier One for about 6 years, folded a small firm into Tier One that I had led for about 10 years before that. And I've been both inside and outside organizations, all in the space over the last, I don't know, too many years, doing organization performance, transformation. We used to call it OD, then we called it OE. And it's just the place I want to be. And I feel like it's the best secret field in the whole world. So don't tell anybody, but I'm super excited to be here with all of y'all and share this work. I work in this space at Tier One, doing all kinds of transformation and organization effectiveness and organization design work. And I lead our organization effectiveness and talent practice at Tier One. So, Anne, I'll toss it to you.
Yeah, hi everyone, Anna Grome. I have been with Tier One for a little over 10 years. I'm a principal consultant here. I work out of our Covington, Kentucky office, live in the Cincinnati area. Most of my work is focused on org effectiveness, org design, strategy, transformation, culture. A big part of the work that I do involves organizational assessment, which we're going to be talking a lot about today, but helping leaders understand an organization's current state more deeply, so they can make better choices about what needs to change, where to invest their resources. Although I've been at Tier One for 10 years, I've been doing organizational research and consulting for over 25 years now, and I've worked with a lot of different types of organizations and industries, ranging from healthcare to finance to architecture, engineering to defense and security, legal industry, just to name a few. But really glad to be here with you all today, and thanks so much for spending time with us. Mike, over to you.
Thanks, Anna. Yep, Mike Lewis. And I also came, like Carol, I came to Tier One through an acquisition. And so they folded in my small AI business that we would use early AI tools to process medical information in a HIPAA compliant environment and some consumer behavior data. And I guess I started to develop an interest in putting these tools in the hands of a broader market, got to know Tier One and shifted from using the tools to helping organizations figure out how to navigate this disruption. And there's been a harder challenge than anything else I've done. It's so messy. So I think that's what we're going to touch on a little bit today. And that's who I am.
Yeah. So Mike mentioned messy. I can say that we really like messy. That's the kind of, we love getting into the mess and getting into the complexity and trying to make sense of it. So today we are planning to share a framework for making sense of organizations and organizational performance. And we have built this session with senior leaders in mind. So leaders who are finding themselves navigating increasing complexity and trying to create meaningful change within their organizations. We are definitely not here to give you a nice, neat, clean formula. We all probably know that most organizational challenges don't work that way. What we do want to do is offer you a lens, a way to think about your organization and see it perhaps more clearly, and to make sense of what might be happening beneath the surface. So we're going to be introducing the Thrive model, and we're going to talk about how Thrive can be useful as a diagnostic framework to help you get underneath the symptoms that leaders are often seeing. So things like slow execution, misalignment. I heard in the chat, employee motivation challenges, AI and governance, data integrity, change fatigue, or change saturation. Like all of those things that you might be seeing as symptoms, the Thrive framework is a way to better understand the conditions that are contributing to those outcomes. So we're going to share also a couple of examples from our work with the framework in real organizations so we can kind of move from theory to practice. And then later in the session, we're going to invite you into the conversation, at least via chat, because I'm sure many of you are working on some thorny problems in your own organizations, and it'll be really interesting to hear from you. So kind of pin that for later and know that we're gonna want you to chime in. And as a reminder, as was said up front, this is the first part of a two-part series. So today is really focused on diagnosis. And then in the second session, we're going to shift toward talking more about how to use those insights to design organizations that are both healthy and high performing. So with that, let's jump in. One of the things that we're seeing more and more is that leaders are operating in a tremendous amount of complexity. You're probably all feeling it. And many of the challenges that we face today in organizations are not simple problems with simple solutions. They're very interconnected, they're layered, they're often shaped by multiple forces at once. And what we know about complex problems is that they usually cannot be solved with a quick hit, single point solution. That usually does not work. And so addressing them often requires slowing down long enough to understand the system more holistically, more systemically, to see patterns, to see tensions and relationships that may not be obvious at first glance. One of the things we often see is that leaders are trying to solve real problems, but they're often doing it while only seeing a piece of the picture or a slice of the picture. And so, Carol, I'm actually going to toss it over to you just to share a little bit more about what we're seeing there.
Yeah, thanks, Anna. I'll echo that we are seeing more and more complexity. I mean, we've always known that organizations are complex creatures, right? They always have multiple components, multiple dimensions. They are systems. And it's really like, I feel like there's a compounding effect happening as technology advances or changes, as the speed of change. I know we saw that in the chat as well. The speed of change increases. So we're seeing more and more complexity. And even though I think we've always acknowledged that trying to solve a complex problem with a single solution, we've always known that that wasn't necessarily the answer, but we tried to take sort of a structured, unball the spaghetti and find the single high leverage solution. Now, what we understand is that trying to solve a single high leverage solution or find a high leverage solution to a complex issue is really maybe a little bit narrow. It's a little too specific. It's a little too single thread oriented with these complex solutions. And I love the metaphor. I mean, it used to be called the blind man and the elephant. We just think of it as the elephant metaphor because you could see the person touching the ear thinks they're feeling a fan. The person touching the trunk or the horn, the tusk thinks it's a snake. And I love that metaphor because the idea of the elephant and really seeing the entire elephant in this gorgeous, complex creature is our opportunity. And so what we're talking about today with Thrive and sort of helping you parse this a bit is to say, what is this complex mess that we're seeing? And how do we not necessarily pick one single thread by saying, oh, our employees don't have the right skills to do this thing, so we better find a training solution. I'm sure many of you out there who own learning and development functions see that all the time, and you go, oh, wait a minute, I'm not sure that a learning solution is going to solve the whole problem. It might be part of the solution. But what we're thinking is, and sort of how we approach this work is how do we kind of step up on the balcony or zoom out a little bit and look at the whole organization so that when you start to pick solutions, and even if they're low-hanging fruit, they're ones that actually move the needle and sort of move it forward. So that's kind of how we think about the elephant a little bit. And of course, I just love elephants. So we had to share this because
Beautiful, beautiful creatures,
yeah, they are beautiful
just like
creatures.
most organizations, beautiful, messy, complex creatures.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
the other metaphor that's helpful, that we find helpful, when we think about complex organizations is, we often think about organizational health and performance similar to personal health. So, health is never a static thing, right? Like we can't just declare one day that we're healthy. We need to like attend to it, we need to monitor it. Sometimes we need an intervention, right? And just like physical health, what you see on the surface in an organization may only be a symptom of something much deeper that needs to be addressed. And I was actually thinking on my drive into the office today about my daughter, because my daughter has recently, I have two daughters, one is 15, and she's been complaining of frequent headaches, and she's been going to the nurse a bunch at school. And so I was thinking, the headache is a symptom, it is the symptom, and there are potentially several things going on underneath, right? She might be dehydrated, maybe there's too much screen time on her phone, maybe it's something dietary, maybe it's a side effect of a medication she's on, maybe her blood pressure is too low. So I can certainly treat the headache with Tylenol, and of course that might help in the short term, but that does not, of course, necessarily address the underlying issue or the underlying ailment that she might be experiencing. So what matters really is to look below the surface, to do some diagnostics and understand what might be contributing to that symptom. So this is where diagnosis is important, and organizations are very similar in that sense. The company might be experiencing things like disengagement, slow execution, low motivation, challenges with AI integration. Maybe there's some burnout, maybe some distrust, team dynamics issues, but typically those symptoms are being driven by deeper conditions in the system that really ought to be understood before the challenges can be addressed. And that's why diagnosis matters. It really helps us move from reacting to symptoms, to understanding really what's going on beneath the surface so that those issues can be addressed. Okay. So let's get into the Thrive model for a few minutes. We want to share with you one of the frameworks that we use, called Thrive, and it's a model that we use as a lens for systemic diagnosis. It's something that helps leaders kind of move beyond the symptoms and identify the deeper issues and tensions that are at play. The framework has several assumptions embedded within it, but one of the assumptions is that organizations are natural, living, complex, and dynamic systems. They need to be intentionally nurtured, and they need to be kept in balance, just like any natural system, including the human body, needs. One important thing I want to call out is that the Thrive model actually was born out of a model called the Ecology of Needs, or EON framework, developed by a colleague of ours, Cal Klein. And he worked with us to translate it into a business context through Tier 1's research and experience working with a lot of different types of organizations. There was something so deeply resonant about the Ecology of Needs model. We could see it in every organizational system that we were interacting with. The Thrive model also draws from a lot of different disciplines and academic backgrounds. So you can see elements of behavioral science, organizational psychology, human factor psychology, complexity science, all kind of woven throughout this model. But at the core, the Thrive model describes conditions that are needed within an organization for it to be both healthy and high performing. And those conditions are reflected in 6 core needs that have to actively stay in balance and be attended to by leaders. So I thought I would walk through each of those needs with you briefly, just to give you a sense of what those entail. And then I'll share a few indicators, and then we'll get into some tensions, and then we'll get into real examples. So the first dimension, and I'm going to start on the kind of the upper right-hand corner, of the model. The first dimension is purpose. And that is about a shared sense of meaning. So it's a belief that an organization's work matters and it contributes to something bigger in the world. Potential, you can think about as the organization's growth engine. So it reflects the organization's capacity to stretch, to innovate, to evolve, and to pursue new opportunity. If you go to the left upper hand corner, capability is really all about the skills, the talent, the leadership, and the clarity needed to deliver the work. I often think about capability as talent activated. So bringing, how talent is brought to life within an organization. And then if you move to the bottom half of the model, connection has a couple of different components to it, but it's about alignment between values and behavior. So are people walking the talk? And also whether people experience a sense of connectedness with one another. Do they feel like they belong? Do they feel included? And is there a sense of overall cultural coherence? Security reflects a sense of safety. Do people feel safe physically, but even more importantly, do they feel safe psychologically? Do they feel like they can speak candidly? Do they feel like they can take risks? Can they question assumptions? And can they operate with trust? And then the final dimension is resources. I typically think of these as all the things, all the tools, the time, the structure, capacity, and support needed to do the work well. And when these 6 needs are present in an organization and when they're in balance, organizations are able to perform more reliably and sustainably. When they are out of balance, you tend to see strain, both from a cultural perspective and in terms of business performance.
What I was going to add here, you probably heard Anna talking about some things that make it possible for people to do their best work in an organization. So you can see that Thrive has multiple levels, and Anna will probably get into this, but some of it is about helping individuals do their best work, and some of it is about how the organization actually works in its environment. So how the organization performs. So the characteristics or the dynamics and the way the system works both operate at an individual level and at an organization level. So people feeling safe and secure to do great work impacts people, but an organization is also looking to make sure it's secure with the right controls, the right boundaries, the right governance, regulation kind of stuff. So I'm just sort of building on what you're saying, Anna, because it doesn't confuse us. We're talking at multiple levels, and it's the right thing to do because that is part of the complexity.
Yeah, good call. And very true. And one of the things that we have found helpful is to use the model at all of those levels that Carol talked about. So sometimes we use it as a reflection tool for individual thriving. Sometimes we use it to work with teams who are struggling with team dynamics challenges or team effectiveness challenges. And then also with organizations who are managing complexity and managing complex problems. So I do want to just stay on this slide for a moment because although, the 6 needs that I talked about, I provided a summary of those, but they all have different indicators within an organizational system. You can see them in behaviors, you can see them in organizational systems and leadership patterns. You can observe them in decision-making practices. And just to give you a couple of examples, strong capability often looks like people in the organization and the organization as a whole having the skills needed. Do folks have clear roles? Is leadership effective? Is collaboration effective? Is there a strong process capability, for example? Strong potential tends to show up when priorities are really clear, strategy is clear, learning is built into the system. So there is a continuous learning loop. And there's a feel of real pull toward growth and toward new opportunities based on client demand. And then connection is particularly strong when you see leaders modeling the organization's values. Also when people feel a sense of belonging and when you see different systems within the organization and practices and incentive systems and policies all reinforcing what the organization says it stands for. So it's really that a sense of like cultural congruence and connectivity between systems and core values. One of the really important principles of the Thrive model that we have found to be valuable and insightful is that the core needs are inherently in tension with one another. If you think about any living system, any natural system, that is the case. Like you can't maximize everything at once. And so one way to think about leadership is it's really about, in many ways, the practice of managing and balancing all these different needs and managing trade-offs in the system. One of the core tensions in the model is between the actualizing forces and the stabilizing forces. And so the actualizing forces are those on top of the model: purpose, potential, and capability. Those are the needs or the forces that pull the system forward toward growth, toward achievement, reaching into the demand and the challenge that is ahead of the organization. The stabilizing forces along the bottom, which are connection, security, and resources, you can think of those as anchoring the organizational system and creating the conditions for consistency and stability and sustainability. They're the things that really enable the organization to continue to grow and stretch. One of the really interesting things that we find is in some cases, organizations will be over-indexing on either actualizing forces or stabilizing forces. So if an organization is over-indexing on the actualizing forces, you might find that it's innovating quickly, it's pursuing growth very aggressively, but that could be at the expense of burnout, of talent churn. It could be at the expense of declining quality if those stabilizing forces are not attended to and balanced. On the other hand, if an organization is over-indexing on stabilizing forces, people might be feeling a sense of comfort and predictability, but maybe the organization is losing momentum. Maybe it's not, as adaptable. Maybe it's not innovating as much, and actually can stagnate over time if things aren't rebalanced. So the goal is really to not to maximize actualizing or stabilizing, but to keep the tension managed. And just a couple other things I'll just kind of, sometimes we think about the bands, the tension bands within the Thrive model. This one is the security and potential tension. And this is really about when leaders, for example, want to see faster change, or they want to see greater innovation and bolder thinking in their workforce, that's great. And it helps pull the organization forward, but people can't stretch and grow and experiment if the environment does not feel safe for them. So if you want experimentation, if you want risk-taking, if you want candor, you also need to ensure that you have the conditions in place within the organization that support risk-taking. And I actually want to pause here for just a second because, Mike, I think you had some recent examples.
Yeah, I was going to say, I'm kind of looking at this through the narrow lens of AI, and I do have a story here. I want to say, the question isn't so much, are your people using AI? More, does your system make it safe to try? And I had an experience where I was put in with the team to help them think through the use of AI tools. I was working with a team of software developers who were very much accustomed to the legacy velocity of work, sort of pre-AI. And I sort of just bit my tongue and watched the team for a month and a half, and was hesitant to demonstrate sort of the new ways of using these tools to do it. But finally, I just went to the project leader and said, I really would like to show the team, how we can integrate these tools. On this project, features for the software we were working on were taking anywhere from 2 weeks to 30 days each to add. And so when I went to the senior developer on the project and said, I'd like to try some, he said, well, do you want to take a feature? And I said, well, why don't you just give me the rest of the whole list? So there were there were 8 remaining features to be added, and I had them done by the next night. And so, yeah, of course, I drug that to the next meeting, and I was very proud. I felt like I really accelerated the project, and I don't think that I was. Um, I don't think that I was sophisticated enough to appreciate how this would land with the rest of the team. And I sort of set a bomb off in the middle of this team, and I had accidentally demonstrated their obsolescence. At a minimum, the legacy workflow, the obsolescence of that, and it was I was the villain, and that was really hard. And I sort of I learned my lesson there. But then, in hindsight, as a retrospective, I appreciate like these people were not given access to the appropriate tools. No one showed them how to use them. It was not safe or okay. I was approved because I own a company that, gives me access to this in a safe place. And those poor people. So now, we've learned a very different way to come in and introduce this stuff that's not so that treats honors them more as a human, and acknowledges, how scary, difficult, and tough major transition can be. And of course, that's just only the AI lens on this broad subject, but just as a slice of the pie, I'll highlight that.
Yeah, and I'm going to add to this because I said, Mike, when you first shared this example, I said, well, you want, right? My favorite thing to say is you want just enough safety and security to make it possible for people to do dangerous work, right? Like you want to be able to balance and I use the word dangerous not to mean physically dangerous, but like to take risks, to be willing to put yourself out there to achieve objectives. And you got that, right? You did light a fire by coming in with the outcomes. And it was more like the balance between making people feel a little uncomfortable and squirm a little bit, but not make them be frozen because they are afraid for their jobs or they're reactive to a situation that they don't think they can necessarily develop the skills for. So even as I said that, as y'all start to play with the framework, you can see all these other dimensions at play besides just that fear piece that we all have to be aware of.
Yeah,
I
and even what you were saying, Mike, about, they didn't have the tools necessarily needed. And so like that's also a resourcing element, right? They didn't have the resources in place to develop the capability. And so that also contributed to that sense of fear and obsolescence. So there's kind of a lot at play there, and it begins to kind of paint a picture of how rich this complex challenge is. I want to go through just a couple other tensions quickly to give you a sense of these. So the next one is the capability and resourcing tension. So you can think about this as think about expectations rising. And I think all of us are probably in organizations where expectations are rising, but maybe the time, the staffing, the tools, maybe the clarity do not keep pace with those expectations. And so when people are under-resourced, it becomes harder for them, to be able to really demonstrate their full capabilities and achieve potential, or for the organization to achieve its potential. And people might be working incredibly hard, but the system itself is underpowered. The other tension that I just wanted to quickly call out is this purpose and connection tension. And you can think about this as like when people are unclear about the purpose or the mission of the organization, or they don't see that purpose or mission reflected in the day-to-day behaviors, the day-to-day decisions, practices, it becomes harder for them to feel a sense of connection to the organization and also to one another and to the work. So that's always an interesting tension to look at as well. When understanding an organizational system. So hopefully that little overview gave you a sense of the Thrive model, the 6 different needs, and kind of the inherent tensions within the model. We're going to now shift from theory to practice, make this a little bit more concrete and talk more about how this shows up in the real world. And hopefully you're all thinking about like what you're seeing in your own real world. But we'll talk about how we use a Thrive model to diagnose organizational challenges. Carol, do you want to start us with an example?
This was a really interesting situation that we entered with a client. We got brought in by a PE firm who had several years before acquired what they call a platform business. And a platform business basically says you're a broad firm and we want to fill in your capability gaps by doing acquisitions. And that's kind of how PE firms build value, by filling in the gaps of capabilities or broadening the capabilities. And they said, we've done this with 4 or 5 companies now in this one platform business, and we want to, they're pretty well integrated and they're pretty like they're sort of zooming ahead, but we're getting ready to hire a new CEO and we want to give her a gift of having the new leadership team in place. So could you just come in and help us like paint a picture of what the new leadership structure should be, and then she'll be able to have her leadership team in place when she comes in. So that was the presenting situation. So we said, yes, absolutely. And it is our practice to come in and understand the business better and to do what we think of as an assessment of where the current state of the business is then, so that we are, as you'll learn from this whole point of this whole webinar, is so that we are not solving the wrong problems and that we are addressing the real issues. And as we came in, we learned a lot. We learned that there were a lot of other things going on in the organization. And what we noticed right off the bat, and I won't read these to you, but you can see that there are, for each of these dimensions, there were some significant challenges. I'll call them tensions, but tensions, the way we talk about them, aren't necessarily bad, right? They're meaning that think about it as a rubber band that's stretched, and sometimes it's keeping the other in balance, and sometimes it's pulling it too far. So in this case, there were a bunch of situations where the tensions were actually driving some significant challenges and conflict. And what we learned was that rather than that, the people were really living in their functional silos or their geographic silos, and that there wasn't alignment even around what the business was going to be. They had different visions and market orientation. So if you, like Anna started with purpose when she was describing Thrive, right there, if you start with a lack of alignment around purpose, you know that you are going to end up with challenges throughout the whole model of Thrive if you go around the circle. But we found that that was the case. And as we looked into it, there was significant conflict, competition, and distrust. We hadn't fully understood all that, but as we dug in, because people were there were overlaps in what people did. There was a lot of role confusion, and that role confusion led people to fear that they were going to lose control, right? And autonomy. So you see that in the security bucket, much like what Mike was talking about, like a loss of job, a loss of control, a loss of the ability to do things the way they've always done them, and then sort of continuing to move around the circle. They didn't necessarily, what they were seeing was, oh, well, you know what? I need help in my role. I need better selling, scoping was a professional services business, selling, scoping, deliverable support in order to do my role. And we have all this role confusion. So how am I going to do that better? But at the same time, you're only investing in technology because that's the shiny new object. So then you can see that imbalance between the capability in the top left and the bottom right in terms of insufficient resources invested in all of those. So we kind of basically said, all of this is kind of getting in the way of this big opportunity that you're saying, which is to help clients solve their big strategic challenges, and sort of move ahead of the competition that was slow to act. So I'm kind of sharing with you what we came out with just by we didn't even have that many interviews with individuals and groups, but we pretty quickly assessed that this was going on, and it led us to a different series of solutions. I don't think we want to necessarily get into the solutions here, but it wasn't just creating a leadership structure. We did do that, we did fulfill the request, but we also got into helping them understand that there were a whole bunch of ways that they could address all of these core issues with a few solutions, but that balanced or included all the components that they were looking at, or that we were looking at and had identified. So that was a super fun example. And
Yeah, I love that example, Carol. And like one of the things it sounds like happened with a team on this, which I've recognized, is sometimes it just looking at the challenges through the lens of Thrive, just it creates a different type of conversation.
it really does.
You know, there's not always not I truly don't believe that there's any perfect model or perfect framework out there. Different frameworks and models provide different lenses on the world, but what I have found with this framework is that it does get to, I think, a depth and richness of conversation around real organizational tensions that enables leaders to really focus on levers that will have the greatest impact on their challenge.
Yeah.
So I have an example that I can also share. I actually have a couple of examples. We'll see how we do on time. Maybe I just share one other one, and then Mike, I would love for you to share some more. So this one was actually with a prestigious private research university. We were engaged by the leaders of that university because as pretty much all universities have, they had a campus dining service and that serves students and faculty and staff. But what they had been noticing is a steady decline in staff retention over several years. And it was getting pretty bad. It was creating real cost and disruption to the university. Obviously, service had been hindered significantly by the turnover, and the leaders at the university had some hypotheses about why retention was a challenge. Like they thought maybe they weren't keeping pace with pay, the industry pay, and needed to really amp that up, but they weren't totally sure, and so they requested an objective third party to come in and do a more holistic assessment and diagnosis of their organization. They were interested in having us look across, people, processes, systems, structures, and culture to really understand more deeply what was driving the issues of talent attraction and retention. In addition to a diagnostic assessment, they also asked us to do some external benchmarking. So like they wanted to look outside as well and say, okay, what are other dining services and other industries also doing for their people, and how do we compare? So we ended up conducting an assessment that was multi-method. We did a survey to capture as much perspective as we could across the organization. We did interviews and focus groups. We reviewed existing materials and documentation, and we also did some on-site observation just to get a feel for how the work gets done, what the environment feels like within various parts of the campus dining organization. And using the Thrive model really helped us, I would say, resist the temptation to just look at attrition as the problem in and of itself, but instead think of it more as a symptom or a signal that pointed to something deeper and richer. And what we discovered in the process was there was a much richer story at play. The organization, the other thing I will just mention is the leaders also hypothesized that maybe people just weren't motivated and they weren't committed to the organization. But what we ended up finding was people were certainly not lacking commitment. They weren't lacking meaning. Purpose was actually one of the most strong dimensions in the system. People really deeply cared about serving the students, creating a sense of community, being part of the university experience. There was a big part of the mission is like, how do we nourish the next generation of leaders? So like people found it really inspiring and really connected to the mission. The challenge that we unearthed through the assessment was really truly about imbalance. So although there was this wonderful strength and purpose, that that sense was very much undermined by significant strain in other parts of the system. People were feeling really uncertain about the direction of the organization, where it was going. There was inconsistent communication, insufficient training, work processes were very unclear. Um, People didn't feel like things were fair and equitable. Um, there was just a lot going on. And again, I'm not going to read all of these pieces to you, but there were a lot of challenges happening and that were creating strain in the system. And people were leaving because they basically were becoming depleted. They cared about the mission, but they were carrying too much in a system that was not supporting them consistently with all the resources that they needed to be successful. So this is just another example of the kind of tension that the Thrive model can help leaders see. And the idea was once we were able to describe the systems, what was happening more systemically, leaders were very quickly able to see the sorts of interventions, the sorts of levers that would help change the conditions within the organization to ultimately enhance retention. So it was like turning the conversation from, what reduces or what could reduce turnover to, okay, what conditions are needed to be restored in the system so the system and the organization can thrive and people will stay.
And just think, if you hadn't looked at the holistic or the systemic nature of the issue and you just tried to, sort of take a traditional approach to how do we recruit more? How do we, you just approach it with a single thread,
Right.
It wouldn't have addressed the issues.
Right. The initial inclination was we need to increase pay. I'm sure that would have made everyone happy, but that wasn't really the underlying issue.
We all know that that's extrinsic, and
That's
we
right.
learned that in our classes, right?
That's
That's
right. And
extrinsic
intro to
and intrinsic.
psychology, we learned
Yep,
that.
exactly.
So it did set up a very interesting discussion of, what will help help, change this outcome for the organization. I wanted to just see, Mike, is there any other
Yeah.
example that you
I,
wanted to share?
I
Yeah.
have one. I kind of want to I want to tell a quick story, and then I'd like to listen to you two react to it about sort of the polar opposite experience of an AI rollout in an organization. And so years ago, I was asked to build an AI powered tool that would augment it's about a 10-person research team. Their job was to look at mountains of consumer behavior data. So this was for a global consumer packaged goods company in our region. And I do remember feeling a little strange about this request because it did feel to me like the owner of the company was asking me to build a tool that would replace a team of 10 people. Um, I built the tool. It compressed their 60-day project down into a button push, and developed this after getting to know the team, getting to know the company, and tuning a model to all this. And I remember what sort of felt like it might be D-Day when I go and demonstrate this tool for the woman who leads that research team. And I was nervous to show her. It did exactly what they do. It analyzed all this data, looked for trends and through lines, and it generated reports and top line recommendations and all of this. And I showed it to her, and she was just over the moon, excited. She's like, "Are you telling me we can skip all the drudgery, all the terrible stuff, and we could just fast forward to the fun part now?" And I showed her, "Yep, and here's how you can go in and validate and find the things in the data. It's just telling you where it is and how to find it." And that just felt like such a different experience. And I'm just kind of curious how you two would react to it. Like, what were the different conditions? Now, we did bring it to the leader. It wasn't like it wasn't a hand grenade in the middle of a meeting, and she very delicately rolled it out internally and showed them, kind of like how to fast forward and increase the velocity of their work. The owner told me now they've gone from delivering one report every 2 months to two every week. Um, let's just I just want to hear you all. I'm curious, Carol and Anna, how you react to this, the distinction of that process and the outcome.
Mm. From a Thrive perspective,
Yes.
Mike?
Yep. This was
Well,
not
you really
scripted, by the
stumped
way.
us, Mike.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah.
Well, I mean, I'm kind of hearing you saying that how you share that and how you roll that out is super important. Like the change associated with it became important for people to see it as a possibility rather than a burden uh, or a threat. Is that sort of where your head is, Mike?
Yeah, I guess what I've observed is that the people who resist AI the most aren't necessarily the ones who don't get it, but more the ones whose expertise is threatened by it.
Hmm.
And
Yeah.
it was just the way we did that one was it included her the entire time. She helped us build the model,
Mhm.
yeah. Anyway, just
Well,
again,
actually,
the
we
lens of AI.
see it looks like Kim responded in the chat. Perhaps the
Mhm.
security was strong in the team, so the people felt safety to lean into the potential.
Mm,
Yeah,
Really
yeah.
nice, like
that's a beautiful
agility with the
analysis.
Thrive
Yeah,
thing.
yeah.
Yeah, and gave
I
them
also
resources
like
and
I'm
support.
curious, Mike, in that situation, was there like as I'm thinking about the dimensions of the Thrive model, was there a clear vision or set of priorities or strategy that was articulated by the most senior leader of the organization or set of senior leaders in the organization that helped create the conditions for people to understand where and how they could fit into
Mm, mm.
Yeah,
this.
good question.
Well, I wasn't a part of those discussions, but in hindsight, there must have
Mhm.
been. And I do know that when they first started bringing me around, people did not want to have anything to do with me. I mean, I remember that in this particular organization that there was just a lot of fear, and so there was a pivot.
Mhm.
I just wanted to kind of kick that one out and see how you all react.
I'm guessing that's a pretty typical scenario for you, Mike.
Yeah, it can be. I mean, you know, there work has changed, and suddenly you can offload really strange parts of what we sort of felt like just had to be human. To we can offload that to computers, and everything's we're in the gray space right now. We're in, we're in between the pre and the post, and everyone's scrambling to figure out what it means for them and their org. Yeah.
Just
Mhm.
a little bit of a preview next week. Mike's joining us here today to like look at how do we diagnose, how do we really understand the system. And one of the things that we're diving into at Tier One more and more is thinking about like the future of work and what it really looks like, and how do we parse what needs to be human and what isn't, and how do we complement humans rather than replace humans. I mean, we're human centered, so we're all about how do we think about AI in a way that is additive, not zero sum.
Mhm. Yeah, and then how do you design an organization that kind of takes the best of both, right? And that enables human AI teaming. And what does that mean for roles? What does that mean for work processes? What does it mean for a lot of different parts of the organization?
Yeah.
Um,
So,
so so where we are in the call now, or in the webinar now, is this place of wanting to hear from all of you for just a couple minutes, and we'd like you to think about a situation that you are experiencing in your organization where maybe you can see it slightly differently when you're examining it through the Thrive lens. So, like at the beginning of the call, Nancy was inviting you to share kind of an organizational challenge that feels harder than it ought to feel right now. And maybe you could think about that challenge and like, how do you make sense of that challenge differently, if at all, now that you've learned a little bit about this lens of the Thrive model?
and if you're really brave, the three of us might butcher it, but play with it a little bit.
Yeah. So what about the
Taking
last
those.
slide? Yeah, we kind of skipped over that just in the interest of time. I can certainly talk about that at a really high level if that would be interesting, and then I'd still love to hear examples from all of you. But so with this architecture firm, international architecture firm, and they came to us with what initially sounded like a pretty small and bounded request. Basically, it's a founder led firm, and they are moving into their next chapter, and they want to be shifting from a founder led organization to one where there's more ownership at the leadership levels beneath them. And they came to us and said, I think what we really need are clearer role descriptions. We need a clear sense of who's responsible for what and who decides what to support us in this transition from being a founder led organization to one that can be sustained over time. But the way our heads work is it triggered a really bigger question for us. Was this really a role clarity issue, or was that simply one of the most visible symptoms in the organization at the time of a deeper transition challenge? So we use the Thrive model here as well. And what we found in summary is, yes, role clarity, of course, did matter and does matter, but that was really only one part of a much richer story. There was a variety of tensions that we surfaced related to founder control and distributed leadership. The sense of safety, psychological safety, willingness to question was a really big theme in this issue, in this organization. There were challenges with external brand and how it was felt disconnected from the employee experience. So it ended up revealing a lot of issues that truly need to be addressed in order to support the founder's vision for transitioning to an organization that can be sustained and grow over the long term.
We've got a couple of ideas in the chat. I just don't think we kind of want to wrap up here and sort of share what we're going to be doing next time. But I love seeing this healthcare orgs, and then we've got one. I work in a large healthcare organization. Generally, people with strong purpose in their work. Yeah.
Yeah.
One thing as we wind down, feel free to add your examples and we can continue this
Mhm.
conversation in part 2 of our webinar. So we can explore some of the things, maybe even bring in some examples that might resemble what you share with us. So as you're starting to depart, just throw in, some tensions that maybe you're observing, some things that you might like to hear about in our next or part 2 webinar, and we'll take your inputs to continue this conversation again.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We did want to just kind of set you up. I think I said it a little bit before in terms of like having Mike here to think about the future of work. I think that's where we're going next time as we start to understand the organization through a Thrive lens, then we can sort of click down, because Thrive is that overall health and it gives us clues about sort of how the whole system fits together. And now we click down and we think about, okay, what are the levers that we need to pull to drive strong performance? So we're going to dive into another framework that we call performance levers, which is probably very similar to other systemic frameworks that you've seen before, but we're going to dive into thinking about how to put that into play in terms of your business's operating model, how work gets done, what does the future of work look like? So we're hoping to dive into some of those topics, and we'll make sure that we consider what you put in the chat as we move into that conversation.
And if you haven't already registered, there is a part 2. We will be meeting back here on April 1st at the same time. When we follow up with the email communications, you'll get the recording and the tools we shared today, some additional frameworks and examples, and then we will also send you the link to register for part 2. Again, we're hoping to bring in some additional examples. So if you let us know what tensions you're interested in exploring further, we'll make sure to capture those and bring some additional resources for you next time. Team. All right. Also, show our speakers some love. So if you have anything that you'd like to add, say thank you in the chat. Thank you again for participating today. We appreciate you sharing your time with us and then providing us any input. So we'll continue this conversation next time, but we hope that you enjoyed this conversation, and we'll see you next week.
Thanks for being here, everyone. Take care.